Imagine yourself in the vast, silenced expanse of space. The Earth is a distant blue orb, the only home you've ever known, receding into the black void. The walls of your spacecraft are thin, a fragile barrier between you and the unrelenting and deadly vacuum of space. The stars, so beautiful from the ground, are now cold and indifferent witnesses to your fate. You're alone. Your mission is shrouded in secrecy, your name a whisper among the elite few who know your purpose. The weight of an entire nation's dreams and ambitions rests on your shoulders. But as you drift further from Earth, you begin to sense that something is terribly wrong. Alarms blare, your instruments flicker, and a cold sweat breaks out across your brow. You reach out in desperation, sending a final transmission back to Earth, a cry for help that may never be heard. The silence is deafening, the isolation complete. Your heart races and your breaths become shallow. In these final moments, you're alone, a solitary soul lost in the infinite abyss. This is the terrifying reality that may have faced the Lost Cosmonauts, brave pioneers who ventured into the unknown, only to disappear without a trace. This is the story of the Lost Cosmonauts. Our journey begins in the heart of the Soviet Union, at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the birthplace of Soviet space exploration. Here, amidst the vast steppes of Kazakhstan, rockets soared into the sky, carrying not just instruments and equipment, but the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. While the world celebrated Yuri Gagarin's historic flight on April 12, 1961, some believe this triumph was preceded by a series of tragic and secretive missions. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. This marked the beginning of the space race, with both superpowers vying to outdo each other in the exploration of space. Less than a month later, on November 3, 1957, the Soviet Union achieved another milestone by sending the first living creature into orbit, Laika, a stray dog from the streets of Moscow. Unfortunately, Laika's mission was a one-way trip, as there were no plans for her safe return, even if the Soviets had possessed the necessary technology to do so, which they didn't at the time. Shortly after launch, Sputnik 2 malfunctioned. Though its nose cone was able to separate successfully, another component, known as the Block A core, did not. This prevented the cooling system from operating as intended. In addition, some of the thermal insulation had been damaged, further causing the internal temperatures to rise dangerously high. Despite what we've been led to believe by countless science fiction movies, one of the real dangers of space exploration is heat. The radiation from the sun striking the surface of a spacecraft can cause it to quickly rise to more than 250 degrees Fahrenheit, or 121 degrees Celsius. With no air, there's no way to conduct heat away from objects, only thermal radiation, which is not up to the task of keeping spacecraft cool enough for life on its own. Sophisticated cooling systems and thermal shielding are critical to keep internal temperatures from soaring to deadly levels. But Sputnik 2 had been rushed, its schedule compressed to the point where engineers were building the craft in many cases not from blueprints, but from little more than sketched diagrams. According to Dmitry Malashnikov, one of the scientists behind the Sputnik 2 program, it turned out that it was practically impossible to create a reliable temperature control system in such limited time constraints. By Laika's fourth orbit around the Earth, the temperature inside the craft rose to more than 194 degrees Fahrenheit, or 90 degrees Celsius. Oleg Gazenko, a Russian military officer and program manager for the Soviet space program, was responsible for training and supervising the animals used in the Sputnik 2 project. In 1993, he revealed that Laika died soon after launch, likely not surviving more than a few orbits. Publicly, however, the Soviets reported to the world that Laika was alive and well until November 12th, 9 days later. Official documents were falsified, and the truth of Laika's fate was buried to protect the image of the Soviet space program. The Soviets heralded her as a hero, but the truth behind her mission was tragic. Laika's capsule, Sputnik 2, completed 2,570 orbits before it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere on April 14, 1958, 5 months after its launch. As troubling as the story of Sputnik 2 and Laika is, it was only the beginning of what was an even darker chapter of history. Yuri Gagarin's historic flight on April 12, 1961, made him the first human to orbit the Earth. This achievement was celebrated worldwide, and rightfully so. But some believe it was not the Soviet Union's first attempt at manned spaceflight. On November 28, 1960, an observatory operating out of West Germany reported that it was receiving a strange signal on a frequency used by the Soviet space program. 2 Italian brothers, Achille and Giovanni Utica Cordiglia, had by this time already gained some notoriety for their monitoring of Soviet and U.S. space missions. They operated from a radio listening station they had built in Turin, Italy, which they had named Tora Bert. When the brothers tuned their equipment into the reported transmission, they heard the unmistakable international distress call of SOS being broadcast in Morse code. The transmission repeated over and over again, and as Achille and Giovanni listened intently, the signal grew fainter. The brothers performed Doppler calculations on the distress signal and made the determination that it had likely originated from a spacecraft on course taking it steadily away from the Earth. This signal grew weaker and weaker until finally it was lost completely, presumably with the cosmonaut desperately transmitting their call for help as they were flung ever deeper into the emptiness of space. The realization that every second took them farther away from Earth, with no possible chance of rescue, would have been terrifying. Less than a week later, Russia announced that they had launched a mission that had unfortunately ended in failure, but without any mention of any lost crew aboard. Giovanni explained, "It was going very, very fast, and therefore it was moving away from the Earth at escape speed. And so, it made us think that rather than bringing the vehicle back to Earth, it was moving away from Earth into space." On February 2, 1961, the Utica Cordiglia brothers intercepted what they claimed was a distress signal from another spacecraft, the recording of which features what they believe to be a cosmonaut's final moments as he suffocates due to oxygen depletion. This incident, if true, predates Gagarin's flight by just over 2 months. On May 17, 1961, a little over a month after Yuri Gagarin's historic flight, the brothers intercepted another disturbing transmission from space. This time, they could hear the voices of 3 people, 2 men and a woman, engaged in a desperate exchange. "Conditions growing worse. Why don't you answer? We are going slower. The world will never know about us." After this, there was only silence. This transmission was also heard and confirmed by other listening stations in Sweden and Alaska. The Russians did not officially admit the loss of any unannounced mission at this time. Only a few weeks later, another recording from Tora Bert captured the voice of a female cosmonaut in distress. In this, possibly one of the most well-known of the Tora Bert recordings, the woman described increasing temperatures and a failing spacecraft. This recording, often referred to as the dying cosmonaut, remains one of the most haunting pieces of evidence supporting the Lost Cosmonauts theory. Neither of the Utica Cordiglia brothers spoke Russian and had to engage translators to understand what it was that they had captured. The following is what is widely accepted to be the most accurate translation of the recording. The female voice, calm yet desperate, describes a catastrophic failure aboard her spacecraft. The exact identity of the cosmonaut remains unknown, adding to the enigma surrounding these transmissions. The Soviets denied the event ever occurred, and that no such cosmonaut existed. One of the most persistent stories involves a cosmonaut named Alexei Ladovsky, who allegedly undertook a suborbital flight in December 1960. According to some accounts, his spacecraft failed to return to Earth safely, and his mission was quietly erased from history. The story goes that Ladovsky's spacecraft was launched from a remote site and achieved a high altitude before malfunctioning. With no official records to confirm or deny this event, it remains one of the more speculative elements of the Lost Cosmonauts legend. In January 1961, another unconfirmed mission allegedly took place, this time involving a cosmonaut named Sergei Shiborin. According to accounts, Shiborin's mission was an orbital flight that ended in disaster when the re-entry system failed, causing the spacecraft to burn up upon re-entry. Without concrete evidence, the story of Sergei Shiborin remains a piece of the larger puzzle. Fast forward to November 1963, when a series of transmissions were reportedly intercepted by amateur radio operators around the world. These transmissions, believed to be from a Soviet spacecraft, described increasing distress and mechanical failures. The identity of the cosmonaut and the mission's details remain unknown, but the timing coincides with a period of intense space activity. Amateur radio operators played a unique role during the space race. Their ability to intercept and decode signals provided an alternative source of information, often contradicting official reports. The November 1963 transmissions, if genuine, suggest that not all Soviet space missions were successful or publicly acknowledged. Western intelligence agencies also contributed to the body of evidence. Reports from the CIA and other agencies occasionally mentioned intercepted signals and unexplained space activities. While these reports are often fragmentary and speculative, they add another layer of intrigue to the Lost Cosmonauts theory. The search for lost cosmonauts is not just about missions that may have failed. It's also about understanding the broader context of the Soviet space program. The intense secrecy, the pressure to succeed, and the political stakes created an environment where failures were not just unacceptable, they were erased from the record. The Soviet Union's approach to space exploration was characterized by meticulous planning and propaganda. Successful missions were celebrated with great fanfare, while failures were quietly covered up. This culture of secrecy makes it challenging to verify the stories of lost cosmonauts, but it also lends them a certain plausibility. Today, the Baikonur Cosmodrome stands as a silent witness to the triumphs and tragedies of the Soviet space program. The ghosts of past missions linger, their stories hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Even in declassified reports, redactions and omissions tell a story of their own. What is left unsaid can be as telling as the words on the page. The gaps and inconsistencies point to events that officials were determined to keep hidden. Historians and researchers face an uphill battle. Each discovery, no matter how small, adds to the mosaic of the Soviet space program's true history. Yet, many questions remain unanswered, and the full story may never be known. Memorials to fallen cosmonauts exist, but they often honor the publicly acknowledged heroes. What of those whose names were erased? How do we remember those who may have been lost in the shadows of secrecy? At night, the Baikonur Cosmodrome takes on a haunting quality. The ghosts of past missions linger, a testament to the sacrifices made in the pursuit of space exploration. The silence of the empty launch pads and the rusting remains of rockets evoke a sense of loss and the restless passage of time. The image of a lost cosmonaut drifting through the infinite expanse of space is a powerful symbol of both human ambition and fragility. It reminds us of the bravery required to venture into the unknown and the ultimate price that some may have paid. The legend of the lost cosmonauts endures as a haunting chapter in the history of space exploration. Whether myth or reality, these stories serve as a reminder of the courage and sacrifice inherent in the quest to explore the final frontier. Having laid out the stories and the pieces of evidence, it's time to delve deeper into the analysis of these haunting tales. What do these legends and accounts tell us? How do we separate fact from fiction? The Soviet space program operated under a veil of secrecy, driven by the intense competition of the Cold War. This secrecy has made it difficult to verify the lost cosmonauts theory. However, several points of analysis emerge from the available evidence. First, the recordings made by the Utica Cordiglia brothers. While their equipment and dedication were impressive, the authenticity of their recordings remains contentious. Experts have pointed out potential flaws and inaccuracies that could stem from interference or misinterpretation of the signals they intercepted. Radio signal experts argue that the brothers' amateur setup, while advanced for its time, might not have been capable of precisely capturing and interpreting transmissions from space, especially under the challenging conditions of the era. Then there are the alleged distress calls, like those from the dying cosmonaut. If these recordings are genuine, they represent a tragic narrative of a cosmonaut facing an inescapable disaster. Yet, without corroborating evidence, these recordings remain speculative. Some who have listened to the recordings point out that the manner of speech or the accent doesn't seem to fit with the image of a professional Russian cosmonaut, that the terminology isn't quite correct, or that the speaker is making grammatical errors that would seem to indicate that Russian wasn't their native language. Coupled with the fact that Achille and Giovanni had urged their sister to learn Russian, ostensibly to aid in their understanding of what they had been recording, this would seem to cast a shadow of misgiving over the veracity of the story. Perhaps it would point more towards a fabrication or misinterpretation of what the brothers captured in Tora Burt. I'm not convinced that this is the case, though. During my research for this story, I've read a number of reports of corroborations from other listening stations around the world who had also heard many of the same transmissions as Tora Burt. Honestly, by all accounts, the brothers seemed more concerned with the science and technical aspects of their radio listening station than the disturbing nature of the recordings they captured. In the many interviews over the years that followed, they remained consistent and passionate about the pursuit of technology, viewing these haunting recordings as nothing more than just another intercepted transmission. They seemed sincere and earnest, and I don't believe that they were intentionally involved in any sort of hoax. I think they absolutely believed what they've said. Now, could it be that they were misinterpreting what they were hearing? Sure. I think it's possible. But given the highly secretive nature of the Soviet Union, especially when it came to their failures, I don't find these stories to be beyond the scope of plausibility. Many have condemned the Soviets for their callous disregard for the men and women they were sacrificing in the pursuit of winning the space race. I'm not sure that this is a fair characterization either, or at least it's an overgeneralized one. These cosmonauts, these loyal men and women of the Soviet Union, were highly trained and extremely valuable assets. Even discounting the tragedy of their deaths from a human perspective, their losses would have had a significant impact on the space program and the morale of the countless men and women working on it. But it is well known, even from former Soviet scientists and officials such as Dmitry Maleshenkov and Oleg Gazenko, that the project's schedules were often driven by politics, without regard for the potentially disastrous implications of insufficient testing or engineering time. We know this, and we know that unrealistic schedules continued to be handed down from Moscow. Declassified intelligence reports from the CIA and other agencies occasionally referenced unexplained activities and signals that align with the time frame of the alleged lost missions. Admittedly, these reports are often vague and open to interpretation, leaving much to speculation. The cultural and political context of the Soviet Union also plays a role here. The practice of altering records and erasing individuals from official histories was not uncommon and is well documented. This raises the possibility that failed missions and their participants were deliberately obscured to maintain the image of an infallible space program that simply didn't exist. Memorials and public acknowledgments often focus on the celebrated heroes of the Soviet space program. But the absence of certain names in official records hints at a darker reality. The erasure of failed missions could mean that some cosmonauts' contributions and their sacrifices were never formally recognized. The Baikonur Cosmodrome, a place of both monumental achievements and whispered tragedies, stands as a silent witness to the triumphs and losses of the Soviet space program. Its empty launch pads and rusting relics evoke the passage of time and the secrets it may still hold. The image of a cosmonaut lost in the infinite darkness of space serves as a powerful metaphor for the unknown and the unrecorded. It represents both the bravery required to push the boundaries of exploration and the ultimate vulnerability of those who dared to reach for the stars. So here we are. The legend of the Lost Cosmonauts remains an enigmatic chapter in the annals of space exploration. Whether these lost missions were real or the product of myth, they remind us of the courage, sacrifice, and mystery inherent in our quest to explore the final frontier. But what do you think? Are these stories and recordings real? Or are they simply fabrications? Let us know in the comments. I'm interested in what you think. Thanks for spending time with me today. My name is Brian, and if you enjoyed this video, please like and comment below. It really helps out the channel. And if you have any stories that you'd like to see covered here, please let us know as well. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.